Probably the big thing that we see installers waste their time on is just low quality leads. So even if they're not actually going out and visiting them, but they're putting quotes together, speaking to them on the phone. Today I'm here with Remi from QSmart. I'll hand it over to Remi to give himself and QSmart an intro in a second, but just to briefly introduce them, QSmart are a MCS umbrella. So they work with heat pump and solar installers to handle everything from design and compliance through to MCS sign off. So Remi, over to you to give yourself a bit of an introduction, your role at QSmart and what QSmart do.
I'm Remi from QSmart MCS Umbrella. So we run a renewable energy consultancy that helps installers gain access to MCS accreditation and the boiler upgrade scheme funding.
From the perspective of both installers and the homeowners, what is the most important thing to QSmart and the outcome that you look to achieve of both of those groups?
So for us, the most important thing is delivering the highest quality of installation and service to both the installer and the homeowner. MCS certification is a prerequisite for the highest level of installation.
Perfect. So in terms of installers that you work with, is there sort of one type of company that usually suits your services best? For example, smaller installers who don't have their MCS, or do you work with installers that are kind of all shapes and sizes?
Generally, yeah, all shapes and sizes. I would say you do typically see your kind of smaller installers and smaller businesses where they don't necessarily have the back end office and admin staff to deal with the compliance and the level of paperwork that goes into an installation. So they would probably generally be your more typical. But then we also do kind of see larger outfits where they may be bigger, they may have 9 or 10 vans on the road, they may have office staff, but they tend to outsource the MCS umbrella.
That's great. So in terms of the biggest problem that you see most installers face, particularly those newer ones that do come into the industry, potentially from sort of general plumbing and heating, kind of what's the biggest problem they face moving into the heat pump industry, and then how does QSmart help solve that?
I'd say it's kind of fear of the unknown. Because it is a little bit more complex from your traditional like plumbing and heat. Traditionally, you'll get gas guys transitioning over. It's a lot more kind of design heavy and paperwork heavy. I'd say the main issue is kind of the paperwork compliance around paperwork that is the issue, and the paper trail that goes along with it.
I think particularly for the ambitious companies that are looking to grow, like as soon as you start taking on more installs, it can come a little bit of a burden trying to handle all the design and paperwork and the back end stuff as well. Particularly for those installers that, as you sort of touched upon, don't have a massive office team, don't have loads of staff who can handle that, they then become a little bit bogged down. Do you have any examples of installers that you've worked with that you kind of helped scale from doing maybe 1 or 2 jobs a month, kind of then doing sort of 1 or 2 a week and potentially even more than that using QSmart?
Yeah, so we had a gentleman not too long ago. This is probably even kind of earlier on in his journey to fit heat pumps. He was a gas guy. Traditionally, he'd been doing gas work for 10 plus years. He'd seen some stuff online about the boiler upgrade scheme. He also had customers ask him about heat pumps, didn't really know where to start. And then he found us online and got in touch. So we took him from the very beginning, getting his qualifications, his heat pump level 3 and everything else he needs to work under an umbrella. Took him through that full process. We then got him on board with ourselves once he'd got the necessary certificates, and then supported him in his first installation. He went from doing just the odd one here and there to securing some contracts. I think he actually secured one for about 60 heat pumps in the end, and he actually did the full project for ourselves. We designed it, supplied it, and did everything for the compliance on it.
I think that's probably the biggest bottleneck that we see for a lot of installers. They come from that background of doing the surveys and doing the installs, but then everything else around it becomes a little bit of a problem for them, whether that's the marketing and the sales, which obviously we'll get onto in a second, or it's the back end side of things, actually doing the paperwork, the MCS sign off. So I think using a company like yourselves to handle all that, it just essentially lets installers work on what they're good at, and then you guys would handle the rest.
No, definitely. I think it is tricky. They do get bogged down. It's also the effect of dealing with all the paperwork and admin stuff that we mentioned. It kind of spills into the personal life, because then when they go home, they're spending time on doing paperwork and compliance work rather than being present at home and doing whatever else they want to do.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's not just something within the heat pump world, but kind of all trades or anyone in renewables, like solar installers and heat pump installers. A lot of them do get bogged down. It's still being stuck as an installer, even though they own a business. By using QSmart, it frees up a lot of their time to focus more on their marketing, the sales, the installs, whatever it is that needs work that can actually drive the business forward.
I think obviously once you've had some buying intent from a customer, then it's just about basically drawing out the next steps for them and painting a picture of where this is going to go, and then giving them the information they need in order to obviously make the decision, and then moving ahead with the installation itself, whether that be coming to us for the design, the equipment supply, whatever you need. We have a SLA of 48 hours. So whether it's the design, paperwork, admin, material can take a bit longer, but that will be done within that time frame.
I know it's hard to say and will depend from installer to installer, but what sort of percentage of the workload do you think you could take off their hands by using your services?
Well, I'd say that the installation side and the paperwork side of things, in terms of the time you'd spend doing both, it's obviously the installation itself would be more time consuming. The paperwork alone would be a day's work at any given technology, whether that's heat pump or solar, depending on how quick you are. if you're not geared up to handle it. So through someone like ourselves, who've got systems in place, we've built up processes over time, we're really proficient at doing the paperwork and getting it done as quickly as possible. So that's time that they're getting back, outsourcing it to us. As soon as they pass us over the necessary things that we need in order to do the documentation, all they're worrying about, again, like we said, the installation itself, the compound effect of that and the time it frees up for them is huge in order for them to keep growing the business.
Obviously, we work with a few Q-Smart installers, but one thing I think they appreciate is the flexibility as well. So you're kind of there when they need to use you for jobs and when you need to submit things, but they're not tied into any sort of monthly fees or anything like that. You don't need to get into the details of the pricing, but how does it work with your relationship with installers in terms of the costings and how they use you?
We're just on a fee per job basis. When you need us, we'll do obviously all the design, the compliance, the paperwork, contracts, material supply as well. At the end of the job, once we're doing the post-installation paperwork, signing the project off, doing the commission of the system, we'll then charge our fee at the very end.
That makes sense. I think particularly for the smaller installers that you work with, it's probably a big bonus for them. They don't have a big onboarding fee or any sort of monthly fees they're tied into. It's more just whenever they need you, you're there, and it's kind of worked into the costings of the job like it would be with the equipment or anything else they use to actually put that job together. You briefly touched upon it in your introduction, but you're what's known as an MCS umbrella. So essentially you work with the MCS to kind of sign off your installer's work. Do you mind kind of briefly explaining your role in that and how you help facilitate those high standards of an install?
Yeah, so essentially, as you said, we work in partnership with installers to help deliver high quality installations. Something that's really important to us is that the installer gets the best service, most efficient service from ourselves, but also the homeowner as well. They completely understand what the renewable technology they're having, whether it's solar or heat pumps, and then also the pros and cons that come along with it. I think for us, it's really important to be transparent, and we really want to be at the forefront of delivering high quality installations and great service to our installers as well.
Yeah, and I think for the homeowners that would use a Q-Smart installer, I think there's a lot of peace of mind for them as well, because for more local installers, obviously there's a lot of benefits in terms of they are close to the homeowner. If anything goes wrong, they can go and service that, and they're not just a national company kind of hiding behind an install, but then they've got the kind of support of Q-Smart behind that in terms of providing the MCS sign-off and ensuring that everything's done to a high standard, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, we've now got plenty of experience in delivering a huge number of high quality installations.
You touched upon it, but a lot of the installers that you work with are potentially smaller installers or people newer to the renewables world who don't have their MCS yet. Obviously, once they hit a certain point and a certain number of installs, it may make sense for them to go ahead and get their own MCS accreditation. Do you mind running through what that looks like in terms of how Q-Smart support them in getting the MCS, what that relationship might look like after they've got it, and how Q-Smart can keep supporting them even when they've got their own MCS?
Yeah, so like I said, for us, relationships basically at the core of what we do at Q-Smart. We really want to maintain a good working relationship with installers, and as you said, we want to see people grow. That means them going to get their own MCS, and that's what's going to help their business grow. We'll always support them in doing that. If they want to use one of the jobs we've done for an audit, that's absolutely fine. If they've got queries or questions and they want help with their audit or any of the paperwork, we'll also help them with that. I think it's our hope that in the long run they would still use us for things like material supply because of the relationship we've built and the service they've had from ourselves. So that would really be the end goal after we've seen somebody go through the umbrella and then becoming an MCS accredited installer.
I think that's something that we've definitely seen working closely with Smart is how much support you want to provide to the installers. It's not just the MCS sign-off, but you now have the equipment. Obviously, you partner with us to help some of the installers with lead generation. From our perspective, we don't just handle the marketing, but it's also the initial phone qualification with customers, making sure they're a decent level of intent there, they've got the budget. The installers, when they go around to quote a lead from ourselves, it's actually worth visiting. It's actually a sales opportunity, because I think you've probably seen it with your installers. They rely a lot on kind of word of mouth and referrals, and then when they do go down the route of doing their own lead generation or marketing, it can be quite a big time burden actually trying to ring through the leads and sift through them. So from your perspective, why do you think there's a bit of a struggle for the installers in terms of actually pushing the lead generation beyond referrals and word of mouth?
I think, again, going back to even the whole umbrella side of things, maybe a dimension that they don't understand. I think obviously that does make things more difficult. I think where it maybe does start to go wrong with lead generation is they may just put some money on ad spend or something like that without someone like yourself managing that for them. And then, like you said, the intent is the main thing that's important, and also the qualification of the lead. If a homeowner is looking at an air source heat pump installation and they don't understand the technology or kind of the territory that comes with it, that can be particularly difficult. You as the installer then go around and the customer isn't too sure what they've inquired for, or even in the initial call, if they're not too sure what they've inquired for, then that can be particularly difficult.
I think particularly for heat pumps more than solar, it's obviously a bit of a newer product to the market. There's a lot of homeowners out there who might have heard of a heat pump or they heard about the funding available, but then when they submit submit the inquiry form on your website or through an ad, there's a level of education it needs doing for a lot of them. They need to be explained how a heat pump actually works, what it actually is, so installers can face a lot of time speaking to loads of people, potentially doing loads of surveys and quotes, just for people to sort of never really go ahead of anything, or they kind of delay it. I think in terms of what we offer, actually phone qualifying leads for installers, it's been probably our biggest selling point, particularly for the heat pump installers that we work with, because they literally just turn up to go and quote jobs of leads that have already shown intent, they understand what a heat pump is, and they're ready to make a purchasing decision. For those smaller installers that kind of you work with, that obviously going to be a big selling point for them as well in terms of using ourselves.
I think the difference with yourself and what we've seen through kind of a personal experience with our installers is that the leads they are getting actually have some serious intent. They understand the technology, and I think that's kind of a breath of fresh air, because you get a lot of campaigns that are not quality campaigns that give you as many leads as possible. You sift through them. I think that's where stuff starts to go wrong. That also then gives installers and anybody who's looking at lead generation a negative preconception of just lead generation in general. So I think someone like yourself who has got the time to ring the customers and actually qualify them properly and make them understand the technology, that's a huge asset to the installer looking at getting some leads.
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, we spoke a lot about time it takes for an installer to do a job from start through to finish and all the back end of the paperwork, but I think a lot of them don't think about that in terms of their marketing and lead generation as well. A lot of installers that we've spoken to, they spend hours every week potentially on the phone with customers, or even driving out to surveys to do quotes with customers that are just never really in a position to actually make a purchasing decision. I think similar to yourselves, we saw the same problems in terms of installers focusing their time on the wrong things when they could just be doing more surveys and more installs that were of a higher quality. I'm exactly the same boat as you. We want to take a lot of that workload off of them and just really have installers going out and speaking to people who are actually ready to move forward with a heat pump.
Yeah, like you were saying before, there's a lot of similarities between the two businesses. For me, what's really important is efficiencies and processes. If you can streamline stuff and make it as easy as possible for these guys, it makes their life easier on delivering the installation itself. If we can take them through the process from yourself generating the lead, from us handling the paperwork, and them delivering the installation, if we can do that as efficiently and as effectively as possible, it makes everybody's life easier.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the installers that we speak to, both kind of through QSmart and just the other inquiries that we get in, as you touched on, a lot of them don't seem to fully understand marketing and lead generation. So that's why they either might have done a little bit of it before but not successfully, or they just completely rely on word of mouth because they're almost scared to take the first leap. Working with a partner like yourselves who works with installers that prioritise high install standards, it really helps us, because when we are placing the homeowners and inquiries that we get of your installers, they've always had good feedback about the QSmart installers that do come around and do the surveys. From the installer perspective, we also get the good feedback that they're actually spending their time on good quality leads who are actually almost ready to make that purchasing decision. They're not wasting their time going all over the country doing surveys for people that aren't ready to move forwards.
Yeah, no, 100%.
QSmart and yourself, you've worked with and spoken with hundreds of installers both on the heat pump and the solar side as well. What's one thing that you see installers spending way too much time on that they could either outsource or just do a lot more efficiently?
Lead generation is definitely one of the things. I think a lot of the time, especially traditionally gas guys who are looking at transitioning over, they may not necessarily have been asked for an air source heat pump to be installed as of yet. I think that some of them may have a bit of an interest in getting into the renewable space, but because they've not had anybody ask them as of yet, they just keep kicking the can down the road, as they say. If finding somebody like yourself who can spark that initial intrigue and get customers who are interested in having air source heat pumps fitted, that'll then ignite their kind of search for MCS umbrella, boiler upgrade scheme funding, that kind of avenue of things that then would effectively lead to us.
I completely agree with that. One question that we get from a lot of installers when we speak to them is if they should be charging for that initial survey or not. I think a lot of that question comes down to they don't want to waste their time going out to leads that aren't that serious. Probably the big thing that we see installers waste their time on is just low quality leads. So even if they're not actually going out and visiting them, but they're putting quotes together, speaking to them on the phone, I think just giving installers a clear kind of structure on how to actually pre-qualify leads and how to understand whether someone in a position to buy and whether you should be spending that time actually nurturing and trying to convert them, or if it's someone who's just looking for information, which is fine, but they're potentially a bit more of a longer term sale. So I think that's probably the biggest one that we see is installers spending too much of their sales time on leads that aren't really going to go anywhere.
Yeah, 100%. I think we do this internally, like sales training. You can't convert somebody who's not in your market or kind of looking at actually getting an air source fitted. I think the qualification of the lead and whether they actually have any buying intent is kind of one of the biggest things that is important. Obviously, that's where the qualification of the lead is particularly important. If you are getting a certain level of lead that's been qualified properly, understands the technology and like exactly what they're inquiring for, you obviously then have a much higher chance of converting that inquiry. In that case, then charging for the survey isn't a bad idea, because you are going to a highly qualified lead, and yes, you win some, you lose some. That's part of sales really in general. Sometimes you have to give a bit before you receive a bit, so it's one of those things.
Obviously, QSmart help out a lot of that, because I think the last thing installers want to do is do a load of surveys and do loads of quotes and then have to do all of the paperwork that involves after that and to end up not winning the job. I think that's kind of where both our models are aligned in terms of taking a lot of that workload off the installers, giving them good quality leads, which obviously maximizes their conversion rates. As you say, QSmart will then take over to help the installer from that install onwards. So what's the biggest myth about installers using an MCS umbrella that you've heard or that you've come across?
I think it's the massive cost. I think for us and yourself, having a really competitive pricing structure is really important. Like I said, we really want to be a driving force in the industry. We have to balance the level of service we give with also the most competitive pricing possible.
I think a lot of installers, they go around and they email over a quote and then just leave it to the customer and hope for the best. Something that we see quite a lot. Yeah, it's just maybe a lack of experience or knowledge on the installer's part to do with the sales process. We see it a lot. So we used to provide leads to installers that they had to go ahead and call themselves. They might not get to that lead very quickly, or they might call it a couple of times and then think the lead's not interested because they didn't pick up. I think a lot of the installers just potentially get in the mindset of staying a bit more on top of the customers, both when that initial inquiry comes in and then also once they've quoted that customer. Because as you say, the other companies out there like the Octopus or British Gas, whoever it is, they are going to have people who are more of a salesman, who are going to have that process and that structure to follow up on. I think it's important for installers, even on a basic level, to have that themselves as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Just out of interest, what's the biggest company that you've got on board with you guys? Because I think a big myth that we hear is that MCS umbrella companies are just for smaller installers who aren't in position to go ahead and get their MCS. So using QSmart, kind of how far can you take your installation business, and is there kind of a cap on the size of the company that you can work with?
Not necessarily. Some of the installation companies we do work with are doing in the region of 30 installations a month, some more. It's just month by month dependent. As you can imagine, it's the same with any kind of business. The more you buy, the cheaper something gets. We obviously have to make it work for them.
A lot of installers that you work with are fairly new to the renewables world. They come from doing gas and plumbing work into installing air source heat pumps. So what's the biggest myth that you've seen from those sort of installers around kind of MCS compliance and all the paperwork around it?
I would say that it's difficult. It is difficult if you're not geared up and you've not got a business that's built around dealing with MCS compliance. When you work with somebody like ourselves, who has obviously now years of experience of dealing with MCS, being an MCS compliant installer, also working with many installers, I think we've got in the region of over 200 installers now that we work with regularly, you kind of become much more efficient at dealing with it. I think that's it. It's not difficult when you understand the process and how it all fits together.
How easy is it for traditional gas and plumbing companies to become heat pump installers using QSmart?
I would say it's easy. I think where the journey begins a lot of the time is training. The kind of beauty of that is these gas guys will have a relationship with a manufacturer, and all of those manufacturers will supply air source heat pumps, and they'll offer training as well. It should be free.
And then for anyone who might be interested in kind of QSmart services and what you do, how easy is it for them to get on boarded with QSmart?
Yeah, like I said, so we pride ourselves on being efficient. So we'll give them a clear list of the qualifications they need to come on board with ourselves. And then once they're provided, the subcontractor agreement signed, they're then onboarded with us and they're able to operate in partnership with ourselves using the umbrella service.
For any installers who are thinking about moving into installing heat pumps or installing solar panels, what is one piece of advice that you'd give them from your experience and learnings of all the other installers QSmart have worked with that you would give to those installers?
I'd say pick up the phone. I think a lot of the guys that we worked with in the past that have made a bit of a tentative inquiry and reached out to find out what it's all about, how everything works, them having those answers allows them to then go and make a decision on whether it's something they want to get into. They get in contact, ask the questions you want to ask, and see where you go.
Yeah, I agree. I think it can be very complicated for installers who aren't kind of in the world of heat pumps and solar. When they look at all the stages that they need to get the accreditations, the training, the work into it, it can seem a little bit daunting. That's probably what holds most people back from actually just getting started. But as you said, like if they have those clear checklists from a company like QSmart, it makes it all a lot easier to actually get going. From your experience being in the industry, what is the one mistake that installers make that costs them the most money?
I'd say it's around lead generation itself. When you've got low intent inquiries who don't particularly understand what they've inquired for or the technology, then spending the money and the time on those inquiries is not what you want to be doing. It's taking you away from focusing on what you want to be doing, which is speaking to customers who understand the technology and have a high level of intent, and also installing the actual installations themselves. That's what you want to be focusing your time on.
Kind of add to that, I think one mistake that we see quite a lot is that installers that we work with pride themselves a lot on how good they are at the actual installations, and they don't want to become salespeople. So I think they then avoid getting any sort of sales training or having having a sales process, which kind of leads to them losing a lot of customers which they should actually end up winning. The biggest mistake that we see is people kind of seeing sales as a bad thing and something that they shouldn't be good at or shouldn't actually have a process for. Because I think even if for most installers they went from being a 2 or 3 out of 10 at sales to a 5 or a 6, that'll see a massive increase in the number of leads they convert and the jobs that they actually win.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of life is sales, really. As much as you want to try and get away from it or that it has a negative preconception, I think if you do get these guys who really deliver the highest level of installations, a little bit of sales training, the difference that will make to their business is huge.
Yeah, obviously if they are confident that they deliver a good job and they make the customers happy, there should be kind of motivation for them to actually want to convince the customers to go ahead with them. A lot of it is just actually introducing installers to sales, and that it doesn't have to be pushy, or you don't have to come across as a salesman who kind of pushes people into something they don't want to do. I think a lot of it is actually understanding kind of the homeowner's problem and then actually just being able to guide them into seeing you guys as the correct solution, essentially.
Like you were saying, the best guys who understand the technology, deliver the highest quality of installation, they're going to be the guys best placed to serve the inquiry to the highest level, and obviously deliver the highest level of service when it comes to the installation itself and answer any questions or concerns a homeowner may have.
Because unfortunately for a lot of installers, when they do go around and do the surveys, they almost become a little bit of an information desk. They answer all the customers' questions, they give them loads of information, but they don't have the sales training or the awareness to then actually be able to understand how to convert that from giving them information into actually getting them to move ahead with an install. So I think, as I said, that's probably the biggest mistake that we see with installers that we work with.
Yeah, I think this is natural to a degree with a kind of an engineering mindset where if you really understand what you're talking about, you'll become maybe an information giver and you won't really look for the close. And that's where training is really important. There's obviously certain things that need to be done and boxes need to be ticked before an installation can become MCS compliant. Once it is MCS compliant, you know that installation has been done to the highest standard.